Final Stop Brasil. Chapter 25. Reconciled with the past. My son is born. When I awoke, a nurse congratulated me for my beautiful son and laid a small bundle with black hair into my arms. For a moment I looked at him and felt very proud and pleased. But I was so weak and tired I had to ask the nurse to take him back for fear he would drop out of my bed if I fell back asleep. Which exactly was the case after the nurse took him back. I fell back into a deep sleep and only woke again when I heard different voices. For a moment I needed to get my bearings, then felt a terrible nausea rise up in me. Exactly at the right moment, a nurse entered the room with a spittoon and helped me so I could throw up. Only now I noticed that I was restricted in my movements. With one arm I was connected to a drip. When I looked around, I noticed the room was filled with visitors of the other two women who had the baby cribs next to their beds. I asked the nurse who helped me with washing and brushing my teeth, "Where is my son?" Friendly and smiling, she replied, "He's fine in the nursery. Such a sweet baby. He is already spoiled by the nurses here." "I want to see him," I said, but she explained this would not be so easy. The women, having normal births, were taking care themselves exclusively of their babies. In my case, the nurses unfortunately wouldn't have the time to run in and out of my room to feed my son, change the diapers and bath him. "But when your husband comes, he's of course free to bring him into the room," she added. How long must I hang on this drip? And felt like crying as she told me I had to consider at least a week. So I had to rely on useless Robert to see PM? I thought bitterly when the door opened and Robert entered with Kathy. "Where is the baby?" was Kathy's first question. "I feel like spewing up." "Thanks for asking," I answered sullenly. One of my roommates told Robert to fetch PM. While he was on his way, I asked Kathy quietly, "Where was this arsehole on Saturday night?" At first she hesitated, then replied, "In the house opposite. You know." I almost imagined it. He will never change. Proud Robert entered the room, pushing the baby cot before him, and Kathy was at once on the side of the cot. PM was immediately the main attraction, also for the other two mothers, including their visitors. "Oh, he's sweet!" Only I saw nothing, because everyone was blocking my view. Robert took PM from the bed and was just about to lay him into my arms, as Kathy forestalled us and held him in her arms before I had even the slightest chance. She didn't let go of him anymore. When I protested, she said only, "You can still have him all the time when we are gone." I assumed no good here, but initially thought, it is better this way than if she was jealous. But frustrated I was anyway, and took this out on Robert with full force. "You asshole! Even if I'm just about to give birth to your son, you still have to fuck around the area and can't pull yourself together. I would love to throw you out, but I won't do it because PM has a right for his father." Of course, Robert denied once again everything. I knew him already and had not the slightest desire to argue more about it. It was useless anyway. The nurse brought PM's bottle. Even before the birth, I decided not to breastfeed. The memory of the pain inflicted on me by Kathy still brought sweat of fear on my face. And Kathy gave him his bottle, then made him burp, changed his diaper, as if she'd never done anything else in her life than looking after babies. I was happy and relieved when both were gone, and one of the other two women declared herself ready to bring PM back later to the nursery. This was the first time PM and I were alone. He was such a cute baby, and resembled a doll with a smooth but not too dark face. Quietly, I spoke to him, and he stretched and stretched while he seemed to listen to my voice. When I handed him my finger, he grabbed it and held it in an iron grip. "You know who your mom is, right?" I spoke softly, and felt so much love for my son as I never had, unprecedented to have so much feeling inside me. I almost cried when the other woman took him from me to bring him back. But I didn't have time to be sad, because now the effect of anesthesia definitely left my body and I felt pain. Not only due to the cesarean, I had pain like contractions and twisted. Concerned, my bed neighbors called the nurse, who explained to me these were indeed labor pains like. "And why? Through the cesarean section, your uterus is building back very slowly. This is not good. If a woman has a normal birth, this process is automatic. For this reason, you are connected to the drip. The funding of this labor activating liquid supports the involution of the uterus." Now I protested. "Are you telling me now I will have contractions for a week?" She reassured me, "No, we will reduce the funds every day." With the help of a sleeping pill, I sank into a deep sleep, but in the morning I was awakened by the cramps in my abdomen. After washing, I tried to distract me a little from the pain by reading the magazines Kathy and Robert brought me, but my eyes wandered again and again, enviously, to the other two women breastfeeding their babies and changing diapers. One of them noticed my sad look and said, "I'll ask if I can bring the little Poopsie here." She was allowed, and I was too happy when she came back, rolling his bed with Poopsie inside. This nickname was stuck with him from now on. Laid him in my arms with a bottle she had also brought, and squeezed into my hand. I was overjoyed. Laughing, she told us that Poopsie was the main attraction in the nursery. All the babies were crying, but the two nurses were sitting there, cuddling Poopsie and being busy brushing his black curls. With a look at Poopsie, she added, "But he's too sweet. The cesarean babies are prettier anyway than the normal-born babies. They're all wrinkled, and half-breed children are all cuter than white babies." Astonished, I looked at her and wondered how a mother of a white baby made such a confession, and even went as far as reckoning another baby more beautiful than her own. But secretly I agreed with her. Poopsie was a dear child, happy and balanced, but if he cried, then he did it with full force and full of rage, if the bottle was not ready for him quickly enough. Due to his working hours and the long access road, Robert could not come to the hospital every day, as there was no bus to the hospital. But on his next visit, he even brought me flowers and took good care of Poopsie. Robert possessed something in his smile, and that was his strength. No one could really be angry with him for long. However, I was happy about every single minute I could be alone with Poopsie. When I spoke to him, he looked me straight in the eye and was very calm, as if he understood what I said. "My little Poopsie, Mama has to work again soon, but every free minute I have I will spend with you. I must earn money, so you're doing well, and we can always travel a lot together. If you're bigger, I'll show you the whole world." During the week, we had more visitors. Initially Kirsten, who died of curiosity about her youngest child and was now totally in love at first sight. I was sure I did it right when I watched her with Poopsie in her arms. The next was my sister Elke and her husband Rainer, standing in the door, and I was somewhat surprised. "We are going to Weißenhäuser Strand beach." But I was so excited about the little one, so I asked Robert how we find the hospital, when he gave us on the phone the joyful message. She explained, handing me a large bouquet of flowers and a package of which I took out a cute playsuit after I opened it. Elke and Rainer were immediately smitten with Poopsie. When they showed the first pictures of his life, he was initially very scared and angry about the flash, but then added it in the seemingly inevitable. Every day I was getting better now, and when at last this disgusting drip was taken off, I urged to go home. After the threads were pulled from the cesarean, it was almost done. On the last weekend in the hospital, Kathy took full command of her brother, but I indulged. At home, I was almost back to old and full of energy. First off, I went to the obligation to offer coffee and cake for the neighborhood, because they all waited, curious, for me presenting them my son. It was worth it, because all brought gifts for my poopsie. Then I introduced him to the firm in the Freeport. My boss was impressed by him, but at the same time they loaded me with 1,000 working technical issues. While Frank and my boss were amused with Poopsie, I found myself back at my desk to do some stale work. Before we left, I had to promise to return in 2 weeks to work, to spare the wife of my boss a looming nervous breakdown. On Sunday, we took Poopsie for the first time in his young life to the Baltic Sea. We visited Elke and Rainer in their apartment at the beach. As usual, Kathy watched her brother every second and reacted almost jealously when Elke took him on her arm. She hastened to resent him again to change his diaper. Only when we sent Kathy to the nearby water park for swimming, it was relaxing and comfortable. Together we took a walk in the sunshine. Everybody took turns pushing proudly the stroller. At home, though, in my spare time, I preferred to buckle the baby bag on the belly to carry Poopsie myself. This way was also much more convenient for shopping, because I always had my hands free. All in all, I was very pleased. Poopsie developed initially magnificent. Robert cared lovingly for him, his sister loved and adored him, and for me he was the meaning of my life anyway. If he cried because of flatulence or for other reasons, Robert took him in his arms and began usually to sing, "Gully, gully, huli, huli." First off, Kathy and I watched in amazement. Poopsie actually stopped screaming and looked at his father in fascination. "He stopped screaming for you to stop yelping," Kathy remarked ironically. Secretly, I agreed with her. Eventually, I asked Robert, "What is this huli huli gully gully gully? Is it Ashanti?" "No, I don't know what it means. I just thought it up and Poopsie likes it," he explained to me. When my working routine started again, and I delivered Poopsie, or my gold baby, as I called him, for the first time to Kirsten, I felt like crying. But what should I do? First of all, Robert's wages weren't sufficient to feed a family of 4. Plus, his whole situation was questionable, even though he had a good chance to get a legal residence permit through the recognition of paternity. On the other side, I didn't even think in my dreams to be dependent on anyone. Over time, I became used to our daily routine and also convinced myself that Poopsie was very well taken care of with Kirsten, and he actually was. Every time I picked him up in the afternoon, he was always neatly dressed, fresh with a pleasant scent of baby cream, and gave a satisfied impression. I returned also to work in the sky at the weekends, and while I listened to music of Tevin Campbell, Babyface, R. Kelly, Boyz II Men, etc., I sold the entrance tickets and heard from the guests how much they had missed me and how happy they were about my return. Robert and Kathy were at home looking after Poopsie. If I slept during the day several hours, Kathy was there for him. We were a drill team, and initially there were no problems with Kathy. Even Robert pulled himself together, and I could be satisfied. But soon I got my first absorbers from my own circle of friends. First, Helga announced the end of our friendship with the argument, "You know, this with that baby, that's nothing for me. I am single and don't have so much on guard with children. Much worse, however, was what I had to hear from Annette after the last time she visited with Hansi. You know, Hansi already didn't like it much that you are together with an African, because he doesn't like them. The fact that you now also have a baby of that one made him decide he wants nothing to do with you anymore. Then my Poopsie became very sick. With not even 3 months of age, I took him with a high fever and severe cough to the hospital. Diagnosis: severe bronchitis. Of course, I stayed day and night with him and trembled and feared for him while the fever was not going down. He had been put on a drip. The attending pediatrician tried hard with his smallest patient on the ward, and when at last the fever disappeared on the third day, the nurse and I cheered together like football fans for a goal of their team. Nevertheless, we had to stay another 5 days. The doctor told me that my Poopsie had a big problem with the bronchi, and the likelihood was very great he would suffer for the rest of his life from asthma attacks. This made me very concerned and worried, but I was keeping up hopes it would not be so dramatic. We were just back at home when Kathy started suffering from severe headaches. I feared it was the result of an oversized mole sitting above the forehead below the hairline and had opened by brushing their hair. This time I went to a dermatologist with Kathy, who affirmed my fears. It was a tumor. He advised an immediate operation here and now. I authorized the doctor to do it and got Kathy back again without a mole, but therefore stupefied. Helpless, I stood before the doctor's office with my almost 13-year-old daughter, collapsed from the anesthesia, without the slightest idea how I should bring her home. The doctor's office was located in the Norderstedt shopping center, and so I had a brilliant idea. I just asked someone to look after my unconscious daughter while I hurried off to organize a shopping cart. With the help of the young man who held her, I shifted Kathy into the cart and pushed her across the shopping center to the elevator, went down to the garage, and shifted her into the car. The following day, I received the next hammer. The wife of my boss placed herself up in front of me and asked in a cynical tone, "Is this in fact going to continue for the next 12 years now? Or who knows how long you will constantly fail because any sicknesses of your children?" I looked at her in disbelief, if what I had heard was true, then stood up from my desk and answered silently and calmly, "No, the next 12 years certainly not, because it is already over," grabbed my bag and left the office. With a lump in my throat, I drove to Norderstedt. This was it then, probably, after 2 years in the company. My direct path led me to the employment service. I was pretty sure I had risked with my spontaneous behavior a 3-month ban of the unemployment benefit, because it was against the law for employers to hand in notice, unless there had been a valid reason. After 2 hours of waiting, I sat before a clerk, described the incident, and that my 2 children, in quick succession, were sick, and therefore I had to stay away from my job, and what the wife of my ex-boss had said. "What did she say? No boss has the right to say such thing. You acted completely properly by leaving the workplace immediately," he commented, outraged. Inwardly I rejoiced, because I would not get a ban. He explained to me I actually would have gotten a ban if I had awaited the lawful notice of termination, because this would have been interpreted as acceptance of the utterance. Live and learn. Now I could initially look forward to a lot of paid time off with my Poopsie. I indeed used for long walks in the fresh air, packing my Poopsie in warm clothing so we could enjoy the winter sun in the park of Norderstedt. Although Poopsie still couldn't sit up properly by now, I changed the stroller so he was half sitting, half lying now, able to perceive his environment. And as we watched the ducks on the pond, Poopsie squealed happily and clapped enthusiastically his little hands. Poopsie's first Christmas I wanted to make special for him. I bought Christmas decorations, presents, and sweets. It was only a few days before Christmas, when only the Christmas tree needed to be bought yet. To buy one, Robert and I went alone to the shopping center. The car park was completely full, but luckily I found street parking. Which road or entrance to the shopping center, which had 5 entrances, I didn't take any notice of. I didn't need to look a long time to find the right Christmas tree corresponding to my ideas. A nice thick pine, about 1.80 meters tall, much taller than Robert with his approximately 1.65 meters. Anyway, he was seriously sweating, carrying the tree to the exit, and was sweating even more as we realized it was the wrong exit. A few times we wandered back and forth. Robert cursed me just as much as he cursed the fear. We repeatedly walked past the same people, and I could notice already some restrained laughing. When I finally found the correct exit, I called Robert, who turned around, and as I saw what was coming at me, I too roared with laughter, because when Robert ran fast, he was not running but waddling like a duck. In this case, however, it was the waddling Christmas tree, which made not only me laugh, because nobody could really spot Robert behind the fear. It was almost certain that some people already searched the hidden camera when we ran past them for the umpteenth time. It was a nice Christmas. Kathy received a new bike. Her old one had been stolen, and she needed a new one urgently to go to school. And new clothes. Poopsie got the latest toys on the market from Fisher-Price. A frame with various Mickey Mouse figures dangling in different heights. If he managed to sit up to touch them, they made various noises. Robert gave him a brown teddy bear, run in by batteries, growling like a real bear. It was love, but not necessarily at first sight, because Poopsie was initially afraid of the bear when he walked towards him, tried and struck angry some quick blows at the bear to crawl away from it fast like a weasel. The most beautiful for me, however, were his eyes, gleaming as he looked astonished at the first lighted Christmas tree in his life. As always, my time was limited, as I had to be in the sky from 10 o'clock at night, Christmas or not. It didn't bother me, because Poopsie would sleep anyway, and Christmas was also in sky always special, and a festive atmosphere. In the beginning of 1992, my free time was partly over. My former boss called me to apologize for the behavior of his wife. Next, he didn't beat around the bush, but came straight to the point. Have you found a new job? No? We are sinking here and need you urgently. When I interjected, I had no intention to return to work so soon and was not necessarily eager to work again with his wife. He made an offer only a madman would have rejected. 2-3 times during the week, his wife would be working in the house on these days and keep away from the office, and he would pay me in cash per day. I should tell him how much I wanted, and that's what I did. Officially, I received unemployment benefits, and this should remain so because I didn't really live badly. We agreed finally on 200 marks per day, plus fare. This brought me an income of the employment service with an amount of 2,800 marks. 1,200 I earned in Sky, sometimes more, and now, additionally, about 2,400 plus fare, 240, overall, just under 6,700 marks, and belonged to the class of high earners. Of course, it was all over illegally, but for many people in Germany, the only possibility to save a little, to afford a cottage or whatever, and my head was seared forever, never to be dependent on social welfare or anyone else. In my private life, some things also changed. Initially, I found out Robert, who had been pulling himself together for quite a long time, now fell back into the old routine and followed every skirt. His interest in his son sunk rapidly, and what annoyed me the most was he didn't contribute a penny anymore to the cost of living. The oblation for the apartment, purchases, operating costs such as electricity, water, telephone, etc. I paid alone. Also the costs for Poopsie, as for care, baby food, up to clothing. He was no longer interested. More and more frequently there was controversy, and he was more absent at weekends than at home. I was glad and thankful I had with Kathy, the perfect babysitter in the house, when working in Sky. But also Kathy gave me grief. This time it wasn't actually her, but the matter of the stolen bicycles over and over again. In February, her new bike, which she received only at Christmas, had been stolen, the second bicycle now. A report to the police did nothing, except a stupid comment. It would help if I registered the model number to the police. I laughed in the policeman's face. What for? Will you guys now introduce traffic controls for bicycles? But then I heard about the Africans from the asylum home were stealing bicycles in the near, but didn't give too much on this talk. Instead, grinding my teeth, bought a new bike for Kathy. She depended on it. But when this also disappeared, I initially freaked out, sat in the car furiously, and when Kathy asked the question where I was going, I just snapped to the asylum home. I knew this refugee home already by friends, so I marched purposefully through the yard, and when some Africans strolled towards me and asked in English who I was looking for, I replied sharply, "I'm looking for nobody. I'm just sick of it that you guys steal all the bikes here in Norderstedt. In 4 months, 3 bikes of my daughter were stolen, and now I want a bike. I'll give you 20 marks for a well-preserved bike. Here and now." The guys were so perplexed and surprised. They were not even on the idea of denying everything. Instead, they called one of their bosses, who actually led me to a shed behind the house where I saw many bikes, the pure bike wholesale. But Kathy's stolen bikes I couldn't spot. However, I achieved for my 20 marks an almost new, of course stolen bike, and this bike was for years in our possession. Unlike my parents, who did not yet know their youngest grandchild, Elke and Rainer came now in regular periods of 3 months. Elke was totally crazy about Poopsie, and Rainer made it his task to save Poopsie's developments on the basis of his new video camera. He cut the individual images together and saved them on a video cassette for me. With my income, I could have easily made a technical innovation like this, but I was always careful with my spending. Therefore, I preferred to buy a new camera. Elke told me our father would have been happy to come and see his grandchild, but our mother had refused. Our oldest sister had done the rest, together with her new boyfriend, to bring our parents up against me with their racist utterances. I tried to convince myself it wasn't touching me. With my oldest sister I had already long lost contact, and towards my parents I didn't feel guilty in any way, but it did hurt. The more it surprised me when my parents finally, in April, came for a visit. My father beamed over his face as he saw for the first time his coffee-brown, curly black-haired, beautiful grandson with the same winning smile as his father. The smile on Poopsie's face froze, though, and turned into a scream when my father took him on his arm. For him, his grandparents were strangers, and strange people he didn't like at all, especially white ones. With black men there were no problems. He called them all Papa. After some time, and with help of chocolate, Poopsie then passionately loved, already next to yogurt, Grandpa and grandson had yet made friends, and my father had his fun with the little whirlwind of 8 months, now already standing shaky on its legs and tearing everything down or over. My mother was very distant, took Poopsie on her arm, but she couldn't show any real affection. But that she never could. Shortly after the visit of my parents, I did general cleaning of the house and wondered about a bump in the floor under the carpet. When I raised it, I found under a tile a packet I opened. The content was bundles of banknotes and various documents. I counted the money and finally sat in front of around 18,000 marks. Very practical. While Robert left me supply for him, he saved all his money. Weird were the documents, though. A birth certificate of Dorothy. On it, the name Kwame Maxwell Darko had been written as the father. The name Maxwell was new for me, because through the marriage in Ghana and also by Prince, I knew his name was Ampem Kwame Darko. In addition to the birth certificate, I found the death certificate of Dorothy's mother. Cause of death, suicide. But this was still long not all. There was indication for the tentative murder of Dorothy's mother against Maxwell Kwame Darko. But this was discontinued due to lack of evidence. I felt hot and cold when I saw these papers before me. The images of Ghana came back again in front of my eyes. This explained why no one in Robert's family gave me the slightest information about the death of Dorothy's mother. I also remembered the old woman who had knocked me out for 3 days with her juju. She had been the grandmother of the young woman. Did she want to revenge on me? Much worse, did I live with a murderer under one roof? I had cold sweat on my forehead. Strained, I thought about Robert, but also if Robert was selfish, greedy, and horny, I was convinced he could not even do harm a fly. Not once did he ever show the slightest sign of violence. Anyway, I put him in the evening speech. He assured me the death of Dorothy's mother had been suicide. It was generally the first time he talked about it and about Dorothy. It became clear to me now he didn't have the slightest intention or interest to bring the girl to Germany. The money he had saved, which indeed wasn't difficult, he had no costs. There was no loud controversy, but I asked him the same evening to look for his own place to live, but was fair enough to give him 3 months' time. After this time, his fate wouldn't matter to me anymore. Meanwhile, I took notice of a compatriot of Neville in Skye, who recently came more frequently into the club. He was strikingly handsome, nice and polite, brought me drinks or coffee to my counter, and I could feel my hormones stirring again. In addition, to be the loving mother, after all, I was still a woman. Neville was not blind and assumed something was afoot. Warned me one morning in the settlement, "Rita, don't touch it. That's a Jamaican." Thus I had to laugh in his face. "Are you not a Jamaican?" "If I remember correctly, with a German wife." Neville replied seriously, "That's why I warned you. Yes, I like you, girl, and I don't want you to make yourself unhappy." First off, I wondered what Neville wanted to tell me with this. Also, we knew each other long enough now, and I knew how he could be unpredictable if his temper ran away with him through provocative guests, for example. Then he didn't hesitate to strike at times. Also Anne, I knew long enough, and for me, she was a self-confident woman without signs of fear or intimidation. I didn't have the slightest idea how right Neville was with his warning, and how much I wished later I had listened to him. When I accompanied Victor for the first time in his apartment, I soon understood why women were crazy for Jamaicans, and single women of all countries, travel to Jamaica to have at least once a year during the holiday a man with large attachments, real studs, and to have some mega orgasms. The term Mr. Loverman, the hit of the Jamaican singer Shabba Ranks, had for me a completely new meaning. Between us, there was no romance and no feeling on my part. For me, it was just hard and brutal sex, and I was crazy and addicted to it. Victor, however, saw things very differently. He was obsessed and wanted me alone for himself. It was not long before he started trying to convince me to abandon my work in the sky. It bothered him that I had a warm, almost friendly relationship with many guests, held talks quite often with people, and many greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. I initially ignored his jealousy. I didn't think the least about giving up my job, let alone for someone who meant nothing to me. There was only one person whom I gave all my love, my Poopsie. He was the meaning of my life and my pride and joy. Meanwhile, he could walk, and we had our efforts to watch he didn't run away. However, nothing was too much for my son. I spent lots of money for toys, bought him first a tricycle. On this he raced around in the garden, in Kathy's or my company. Bought a pedal car he also liked to use. He was always dressed nicely, and I loved to buy the latest fashion for him, from head to foot, including caps, how the big guys were using. I let his hair grow, and he now had a real curly afro on his head. I had an African woman fix 2 long braids in his hair, which made him unique. He was a very beautiful boy, with a doll-like face. The more he grew up, the more beautiful he became. But even if he laughed most of the time, he usually got some temper tantrums, when it was almost impossible to control him. Then he lashed out, biting and kicking. Once I entered the house when he had one of those tantrums with Kathy, grabbing her long hair and forcefully pulling it. At the same time, he powerfully bit her hand when she tried to fend him off. With her free hand she slapped him, but that only made him even angrier. At first, I had difficulties to tame him, but then I got him in a kind of gentle grip hold, and held him with pressure close to me, spoke softly to him until he calmed down. Then I threw a glance at Kathy, and hissed in dangerous, threatening tone, "Never ever put a hand on him again." This was the moment she withdrew definitely from me, and I never came back close to her. Nevertheless, she lovingly continued to take care of Poopsie. However, things happened which gave me much to think. One day Victor remarked I should probably have a talk with my daughter. He found it a little odd when he was alone with her and she walked around in lingerie in front of him. Actually, I had noticed she was constantly rummaging in my laundry and borrowed parts. In the beginning, I didn't think too much of it, because she was finally in the puberty and wanted to experiment. But experiment with what? Snatching my boyfriend? Or at least kinda? The summer was quite interesting, and yet there were no problems with Victor other than some arguing with him. But he didn't like it if Robert, who was now living in Hamburg-Wilhelmsburg, together with his Ghanaian girlfriend, quite often came to visit Poopsie. However, it seemed to me he had long viewed his mistakes and repented. The visits were obviously more addressed to me than to Poopsie. He often brought me gifts, such as a super chic denim pantsuit. Victor responded each time with jealousy when he became aware of Robert's visit. It didn't bother me. As a matter of fact, I didn't care. All I wanted was sex with him. Later, he introduced me to his uncle, and I was stunned. His uncle was the man of the shows on the Reeperbahn, the live sex show. He lived with his wife and 3 children in his spare time as a nearly normal family man. I liked his wife and the children. We spent many hot summer days together on a lake located in the vicinity. Poopsie shrieked with pleasure when he was allowed to splash in the water. Victor's uncle and his wife talked quite freely about the somewhat unusual profession. I was well surprised as they told me they had jointly made the show earlier, but she had excited because of the children. He continued with a younger woman, who also had a child with him, but still continued the show with him and now was regarded as his second wife. In fact, he lived 4 days with his family and 3 with the other. There were no problems, assured me his wife. They would respect each other, and each woman came to her expense. One kind of living, but not necessarily mine. I used my vacation in this hot summer to go with Kathy and Poopsie to the beach at Weissenhaus. There we met. How else could it have been, Elke and Rainer? The first time when Poopsie saw the waves of the sea, he was dreadfully frightened and didn't like at all when I took off my shoes and his to run with our bare feet towards the waves. Elke, Rainer and Kathy had their fun as Poopsie was dragging and pulling my arm with his 2 little hands and all the strength he possessed to save Mama from the waves. Laughing, I looked down at my son with his head bent that made him look like a doll, and felt so much love for this child as I never felt before for anyone. It was an overwhelming feeling. The sun had darkened Poopsie's skin extremely, so he was almost as black as his father. Back in Norderstedt, an elderly woman gave me reason to be angry as she started talking to me on the street. "Oh, what a sweet boy! Where did you get him from?" Outraged, I looked at the woman up and down, then answered, but not without pride, "These children you can't buy anywhere. This is my biological son." Something else annoyed not only me but also Poopsie. Complete strangers patting my son's hair, how they would do it with a dog. He then moved away his head and looked at me for help. Protector as I was, I sneered at the people. "Leave it. This is a small boy and not a small dog, and he doesn't like it." Another time I asked provocatively, "How would you like if I go through your hair like this?" Later, when my Poopsie was a little older and could speak properly, I inoculated him to say exactly the same words and not to take his shit from people. His first birthday, Kathy and I celebrated alone with our Poopsie, who was very happy about many new gifts and ate with a big appetite the chocolate cake I had made for him with love, decorated with colorful sugar ornaments and 1 large candle. With Victor, I got to know the sound of reggae and the philosophy of the Rastafarian. Victor was not a Rasta, his hair being short, which made him very handsome, but he loved reggae music. He took me to clubs where only reggae music was played, or to reggae live shows. I was actually a little proud of him when he recorded his first CD in the Hamburg recording studio of Jamaica Papa Kervin, those times in the scene a quite well-known Jamaican musician who lived in Hamburg. Under the artist name Mighty V was the CD released where he proved his talent as a toaster, Jamaican rapper who raps in Padua, the national language. However, for Kathy, Victor advanced to the absolute hero when he arranged a meeting with Shabba Ranks, a friend of his, in the hotel. When I told Kathy she would meet her idol personally, she adored Shabba Ranks and his music since the hit Mr. Loverman. She almost fainted. On the way to the hotel, I had to stop on the road because she was sick with excitement and I had to throw up. For me, it was nothing unusual. Through my work in the sky, I had met so many VIPs I knew long by now. They were normal people like everyone else, did their job, one better, the other one worse. This way I also looked at Shabba, with whom I had a nice talk and noticed he owned a lot of humor. I just couldn't make out what all the women found on him. He was anything but not handsome. Oh yes, he was Jamaican. It was a very pleasant and enjoyable afternoon with the men of his band and the singers and dancers. We took some photos, and as he relaxed his arm around Kathy's shoulders. She almost fell back into unconsciousness. Poopsie was, of course, with us, was passed from one to another, and didn't understand at all the excitement of his sister. To the show in the evening I watched backstage. Kathy was not allowed to come due to her age, and missed, of course, the best part. I felt very sorry for her. Shabba brought the hall into ecstasy, came just before the end to us behind the stage to ask me which song he should sing for me. "Bedroom Bully," I called enthusiastically. The fans celebrated and danced to the music. Everyone knew the tracks from his CD. This was one of the best memories of the time with Victor. What happened afterwards left no good memories, and I preferred never to think back to those days. He was becoming more and more possessive, jealous, and began to quarrel with anyone who came too close to me, so that even Neville asked him not to come to the sky any more. Sometimes he stood for hours outside the door just watching me. Then he accused me of having a secret relationship with Robert. More than once I warned him, "Stop with this shit, otherwise it's over." It was contradictory and schizophrenic, for he knew I needed to have sex with him like others need drugs. "You're not going to leave me. You're much too crazy about my prick." The quarrels became more violent until one day it came to a sad peak. Robert was with us to see Poopsie when Victor called. I refused to see him with the reason Robert was with us and I had to work in Sky that night. Therefore, I had no time. I didn't see why I should be telling lies regarding Robert. He was Poopsie's father and had a right to see his son. In his rage, Victor got drunk, came to Norderstedt, and lurked outside the house. Robert had asked me to give him a lift to the Reeperbahn. As we both left the house together, we were suddenly confronted with Victor, who screamed he always had known we did it secretly. Thus, Robert was also angry, and there was a scuffle. The bottle Victor had held behind his back I saw, unfortunately, too late, as he smashed it on Robert's head. I had already arrived at my car, opened it up, jumped in, let it on, and raced initially towards both. Robert collapsed by the blow, and I noticed the blood running from his head. Victor still beat Robert, who now rose to ward off further blows, and finally landed a punch on Victor, so that now he collapsed. With the open passenger door, I maneuvered the car backwards and called Robert to jump into the car, just as Victor was about to topple back onto Robert. He leaped into the car, and I noticed with horror how strong he was bleeding when I drove off at full throttle to bring Robert to the next hospital, where the gash was sewed. This night I did my job jittery with trembling hands. I was afraid of Victor. In particular, I was worried about Kathy and Poopsie, and called repeatedly at home. Kathy assured me everything was quiet, and Victor had not come to the apartment. She had watched the scene from the window. This was too much. It was the end for me. In the morning, Victor was waiting outside the Sky to talk to me. "There is nothing more to talk between us. You make me sick," I said to him in ice-cold tone. "You can't do that. If you finish with me, I'd kill myself," he threatened, while he was holding my arm. Tearing my arm loose, I said, "You're sick. If you want to kill yourself, please, I won't stop you." With these words, I left him standing and walked to the car. But I realized how much I was shaking. Victor made me really scared. Then began real telephone terror. Night after night he called at my home and threatened I would die together with him. During the day the terror went on, because he blocked the phone lines in the company, and my boss already cursed. "What idiot is this?" I just shrugged my shoulders and tried not to show emotion, even though I was already a bundle of nerves. Finally, I asked Victor's uncle for help, who promised to talk to Victor. It helped nothing. The terror continued. Also from the police I couldn't expect any help. I was only told, "Well, as long as nothing happens, we can't intervene." The fact that something had already happened, unfortunately, I couldn't specify, because Robert's illegal status still hadn't changed. His death threats were ever more frequently and appeared more threatening. Eventually, I told Neville about it, because he had long since realized I was down with my nerves and panicked for anything, especially if I had to walk alone to the car after work. Neville looked at me thoughtfully for a moment without speaking. There wasn't much he could do, but he spared me. Don't say I didn't warn you. The only thing he could do, he did, and made sure the doormen were waiting for me until I finished the settlement to accompany me then to the car. Saturday, the following week, Neville was not present. Victor entered the club, walked past me without deigning to look at me, and went up the stairs. The doormen knew he was one of Neville's compatriots, but they didn't know he was exactly the one who threatened me. Therefore, they allowed him to enter the club. After a few minutes, he came back halfway down the stairs, but then remained standing there to watch me. Inside of me stirred an evil premonition, but before I could say something to the bouncers, one of our regulars came in, greeted me with a beaming smile, and of course a kiss on the cheek. He was not quite past my cash, as Victor stormed down the stairs and shouted, "You whore!" and gave me a hard slap in the face. Both bouncers stormed in from outside and immediately beat him to kick him out afterwards. But Victor would not let them throw him out just like that, and went somewhere in a neighboring restaurant or whatever, grabbed a giant pair of scissors lying around he probably spotted, came back, and stabbed one of our bouncers. It all went terribly fast. I understood only now what a dangerous psychopath I got involved with. The second bouncer came to rescue and struck at Victor until he lay on the ground. When the police from the Davidwache, famous police station at the Reeperbahn, next door, arrived, we reported him. With this report, I went to the court to obtain from the judge an interim disposal. I received it, and it was forbidden for Victor, under award of a hefty fine, to approach me at a distance under 200 meters. Initially, it was quiet. The phone calls had stopped, and slowly I began to breathe again, and rejected in my mind emigrating to another country, or to flee in general. I hadn't even thought about the incidents anymore, when one morning I brought Poopsie to Kirsten, already lifted him from the seat, as I turned and saw Victor, who came with a bike towards me with high speed. My only thought was about Poopsie, whom I quickly put back last minute into the car before Victor attacked me with a knife. I fended off the knife, but could feel how it cut my hand. He overpowered me, had me with one arm in his grip, and held with his free hand the knife at my throat. It was so unreal, as it seemed to me as a film running before me. I knew I would die now, but I was only a spectator. I was not concerned myself. Without me registering, several people from the houses of the settlement had stormed outside, shouting at him to drop the knife and let me go. Someone had called the police, arriving now, and aimed with guns at him, which finally made him drop the knife. In handcuffs, he was put into the police car, while I had to give record of what had happened. I knew I had a huge protection angel taking care of it, that I came out so smoothly. I never saw Victor again, but learned later of his uncle. He had put him, after the sentence in prison, in a plane back to Jamaica. Before my unemployment year was over, my boss asked me one day if I had already looked for another job. I knew what he was getting at and gambled. "Yes, I have, and think I found a very good position. The salary is good. I would like to ask you once again to work for us officially. What do you think? I could see you manage everything in 3 days a week, and you have everything under control, so we could also agree on those labor hours in a contract, and I'm offering you a salary of 4,800 marks. Without batting an eyelash, I said, "I'll think about it." I didn't want to make him realize that this was exactly what I wanted. Not once I had looked for another job. The Sky Club, meanwhile, underwent a lot of changes, even for me. The authorities of the city of Hamburg, as owner of the building which housed the club, planned and had the right to kick Neville out of the lease, with the target to demolish the building on the Spielbodenplatz and build a parking garage. The lower floor had been closed by Neville already, because the rent was so high now he could hardly bear both floors financially. The upper level was maintained initially as a club, but his concerns and the associated permanent bad mood he took out on everyone from now on. To make things worse, Karl, a Jamaican like Neville, had opened a new discotheque in Hamburg-Harburg. The club reached after only a short time the same reputation as the Sky, and was the first real competition for Neville. While the number of our guests sunk, the World Club allowed only guests in with elegant clothing. Between Neville and me were more frequently disputes, because I believe, basically, he made lots of wrong decisions. He wanted to deny the entry for Africans, unless they came in female company. This pleased very much the Turks, the Kurds, the Albanians, the Serbs, and the Algerians. A dangerous mix, with the result of fights and stabbings. Neville, kick these people out of the club, or I go, I said one morning angry. Damn, this is a black club. For blacks. Did you forget that in your money lust? The female guests who came before stay away because they prefer to go to the World Club. And why? Ask yourself. But I tell you, they want to meet men, black men. Here they can find them only in female company. I knew of what I was talking about, as I had myself been in the World Club. Neville protested. The asylum Africans didn't bring any turnover, but the one sitting at the cash and knew who was coming in with big bills was me finally. How this money was earned, by stolen goods or drugs, was ultimately not in our interest. Which gastronome asked his guests how they are earning their money? Penny, our former manager, had long been gone in dispute with Neville, and Neville possessed no idea how he could polish up the reputation of the club again. So I developed initiative. The club had become part of my life, and the staff was like a family for me. It hurt me in the mind to see this all go down. Initially, I started with Turks, Albanians, and Africans from Gambia, a small war as I denied them entry. I didn't do this because of their nationality, but because of their unkempt appearance. Ghanaians, Nigerians, and Africans from a country of which I didn't even know it existed previously, Guinea-Bissau, were allowed inside. With Ghanaians, there had never been problems. I didn't really like the Nigerians, with a few exceptions, but they brought the most revenue. The Guineas, as I called them, were always well maintained and always appeared in the latest fashion, either in elegant evening suits or hip-hop clothes. They were the magnets for the female guests. My plan worked. Unfortunately, this was not enough yet. The club filled up again on Saturday, but on Friday there was a gaping void. So I made contacts and negotiated with a well-known radio DJ who hosted programs of black music. Actually, I managed to have him working at the turntables for quite a good price on Friday nights. Eddie, a nice Serbian guy and well-maintained party organizer, I hired during the week to organize theme parties. At those events, the cash register was closed, the entrance free. I saved costs for bar staff while serving myself on these nights at the bar. Sometimes I spent good paying regulars a free drink. If Neville saw this, he freaked out due to his stinginess. He would not even give his best friend a free drink. I gave him the only possible correct answer. Keep out of this. If you don't like it, then go home. In this tone, only I could dare talk to him. Everyone else would have been fired on the spot. Neville knew what he had in me, for this again proved the rising numbers of guests. The guests and the staff respected and liked me. They regarded me as the unofficial manager. Any problems that occurred, they asked me instead of Neville. Often it happened that guests brought a wide variety of gifts, from wallets, key pendants, to anti-cellulitis cream. The last, though, made me think. With Ralph, or Cool R, his DJ name, I had a good friendship, and also with Ralph's friend Bobo, the DJ from the World Club. The staff of both clubs had a pretty good relationship to each other. Another friend of Ralph, Amir, an Iranian, studying medicine in Germany, came every Friday and Saturday in the sky and fell in love with me. Instead, like before, together with Ralph at the DJ desk, he now kept me company most of the nights, providing me with coffee or other drinks. I liked Amir very much. He was very witty and a fun diversion for me, but more wasn't to be expected from my side, and I made this clear to him very soon. Initially, he responded quite bent on my offer of friendship, but finally accepted it, and we turned two great friends, and from friends it turned into love. Not the love between a man and a woman, no. I loved Amir like a brother. I never had. My meager spare time I spent almost exclusively with Amir in long conversations. If we didn't see each other, we talked on the phone for hours. Amir was at this time the only person who could come close to me and even touch me. Otherwise, only my children or a man with whom I was having a relationship was allowed to do so. All other friendly hugs or touches deterred me basically. My friends knew this and accepted me as I was. But Amir was allowed to hug me, touch me, hold my hand, and sometimes we also shared his bed without one of us having the idea of sex. If he suffered by love sickness, I suffered with him, and vice versa. It was no different. For our respective partners, it was not easy to believe. We kept up a relationship like brother and sister, and nothing more. In my life, there were very many friends, good and bad ones, but for no one I felt as much as for Amir. I respected him and his religion of Islam, and admired him for his intelligence and skill. No matter what it was, Amir was always informed and knew just about all. Also, he was not arrogant, but just funny. In addition to the medical school, he earned money by painting and decorating and other repair work. When he met Ayşe, a Turkish woman, the relationship almost failed at the very beginning because she could only have Amir if she took me as well as a free gift. Over time, her jealousy diminished, and we even became friends. With Ralph's fiancée, I got along well, and we were altogether a pretty funny group, especially since we followed a new habit and went on Sunday mornings after our work in a well-known Hamburger five-star hotel to attend alongside of all possible celebrities who descended there not only breakfast, but to feast on the luxurious buffet in the orangery, 2 or 3 hours. Either Vobo came with his entourage from the World Club into Sky if he finished work earlier than Ralph, or we all went to the World Club, when the lights went off in the sky before, to pick up Vobo. The management of the hotel knew we had something to do with the music scene, but nothing more detailed than that. So they took us for one of the many bands dismounting there, and treated us accordingly polite, respectful, and for the buffet we were always charged only half the price. It was just wonderful to apply for these few hours as a star, and to sit together, to chat, to make nonsense, and to listen, especially Amir's jokes, with a lot of coffee, hot chocolate, orange juice, or sometimes champagne. Roland, a Nigerian, but a completely atypical one, with his shoulder-long dreadlocks, and a good heart and character, counted later also to my friends. I met him as he stood shyly in front of my cash, and explained, "I have opened a little club around the corner. May I distribute the flyers for it inside here?" I knew if I allowed him and Neville got wind of it, I would have to listen to some shit again, because Neville saw red when he only smelled competition in his vicinity. But I didn't look at a small club as competition. Besides, didn't it make any difference to me if he distributed the flyers inside or outside the door? And so I allowed him in. With a lovely smile, he thanked me. That was initially, for a few months, the only time I saw Roland. My gaze was fixed on an entirely different object of desire. For the first time, I broke now with my principle of starting nothing with guests from the sky. But Charles, a guinea, an absolute swarm of all women, was, in my opinion, worthy a sin. He looked great, always dressed in the latest style. Whether hip-hop or suit, he appeared super and elegant in the clothes. Of course he knew this, and wouldn't let anything burn. As soon as I turned my back on him, he was busy flirting with all the girls. For me he was sexy, but neither with him I was in love. It was rather down to my instinctive hunting abilities and to check my market value that prompted me to enter a relationship with him. I let him do whatever he wanted, and he did the same without any jealousy existing between us. Thus, he presented no problem for my work in the sky, neither when I set out with Amir or the whole gang. But Charles found it very beneficial that I was known in those days throughout the town and the music scene. If I ever took a day off on a Saturday, which was rare, to go out myself sometimes, then I didn't pay entrance in any club, and this also valued for my company. However, I preferred instead of Saturday night to go on Monday night in the Big Apple, a disco in Hamburg-Barmbek. All of us from Sky met there with the World Club staff, and as we all usually worked on weekends, we had our party then on the dance floor, flirting included. That's why I didn't need Charles around me those nights. It was rarely, however, because it was simply too strenuous. Almost all of us worked like me during the day. I had the advantage of having the Monday off, but Tuesday morning I was feeling too tired to work. My shoulder-length red-colored hair I changed at this time to a cheeky short haircut, and was determined to change the color of my hair too. I wanted it dyed to a light blonde. With this, I had put my hairdresser initially before an insoluble problem. Without knowing which aggressive hair dye I had used before, he carefully spread the dye cream for the light blonde color into my hair and gave it time to effect. The result was a bright glowing orange. My hairdresser almost fainted, while I found it quite funny, as yet. Nevertheless, my hairdresser didn't give up and spread now a chemical liquid to extract the color from my hair. My scalp was burning so much, I worried about whether I would leave the salon with or without hair. When he took off the plastic cap that covered my hair, he made a face I will not forget all my life, but I must have looked just as stupid. My hair was a bright light green. In panic, he ran away and consulted his boss, who was finally looking at the mess, and explained professionally that it never should be red hair dye, and especially not that brand I used, mixed with blonde dye. This is all wonderful, and now, I'm not leaving here with green hair, I protested. No, I didn't need to. The whole procedure was repeated once again, and finally, out of. I just quickly go to the hairdresser. Became a session of 5 hours. Later, I and my clique were laughing tears about my story, and I actually regretted not having taken my camera with me. Charles, with his beauty care, however, put the crown above all, and joint nights with him were anything but sexy or romantic. In our first night together, I was startled, actually, as Charles went off with his beauty handbag into the bathroom, and especially when he came out again. A nightcap on his head, for his hair wouldn't fall in disarray, and on his face a thick layer of white night cream. Of course, this wasn't always like this. I would never been able to endure him for 6 months. With Poopsie, Charles didn't really have not so much connection, but therefore his friends, who visited me frequently, played around with him the more. Poopsie loved it when John, Charles' best friend, or Geraldo and Don Paulo, an Angolan, frolicked with him. The more hully-gully in the house, the better it was for my Poopsie. Among all, it was Geraldo, who was the absolute favorite for Poopsie, and Geraldo was just as besotted. In time, eventually, Amir and Geraldo had both become substitute papas for Poopsie. His biological father had not much time. Actually, he was busy to make more children and therefore visited only very rarely, if at all. One evening, Marco appeared at my cash register, saw me, and fell in love with me. This was nothing special for me, and usually I let the man slam down gently but firmly. But with Marco, an interesting mixture of an Italian father, hence the name, and a mother from Zimbabwe, this was quite different. He immediately aroused my curiosity by his handsome appearance and athletic toned body. I soon learned that he was a professional player of a football club in Hamburg, unhappy, as he said, married, and the father of a little daughter. This first evening he spent at my side and climbed only the stairs to the club to order drinks for us. After I finished the payroll and paid staff, he invited me into a small club around the corner, Roland's club. Roland recognized me immediately and greeted us like old friends, gave us a drink on the house, and explained Marco how he knew me and why he liked me right away. Normally in other clubs there are always problems when you distribute information, but not with Rita. I looked around, and what I saw I liked very much. Roland's wife sat down with us after Roland introduced us, and I didn't spare compliments, because it was obvious that a woman had worked here. "Marco, I didn't know Rita is your girlfriend," Roland said in amazement. "Normally you always come alone." Marco smiled, put his arm around me, and left Roland in his belief. Later, as we sat alone at the bar, talked, flirted, and kissed us again and again, I learned that Marco loved passionately black music and also liked to dance. His wife, though, shared these passions not at all. "At home, I can't even listen to music. I feel like in a prison," he confessed. I doubted his story, but Marco was kissing heavenly well. We left the club together, going in his car to an empty shopping mall parking lot where we made love in the car. Marco was very passionate and affectionate, and he became for many months my secret relationship. Charles was betraying me, and I was betraying him. Simple as that. This Christmas we celebrated all like one big family in Bobo's apartment, including Kathy and Poopsie. Originally, I planned this year not to work over Christmas in the sky, instead to visit my parents, but my mother refused. She was embarrassed to show the youngest grandchild before the neighbors. Instead, she sent money for Kathy and me as a gift, and for Poopsie cheap, loveless, selected toys of some cheap offer. My birthday, however, had been organized by my substitute family very nice this year. Alex had baked a cake for me. I was given in sky with 32 burning candles. Neville made the champagne corks pop. By Ralph, Wobo, Eddie and his girlfriend I received gifts, and 2 big bouquets of roses I received, each from Charles and Amir, who flattered, "Sister, you look like 22. The 10 years you have more on the hump." No one would believe them. Through Amir I discovered a new passion. Since the first time he took me there, I was almost addicted to the dinner in the Pakistani restaurant Baluchistan. We made it a habit to go once a week to this oriental restaurant with a delicious buffet dinner. However, there was no fixed day for us. Whenever I felt like it, I picked up the phone, called Amir. I needed only to say Baluchi. Promptly he asked, "Tonight?" Sometimes we sat for hours eating or drinking delicious yogi tea. Everything I had on my heart, I talked it first over with Amir. He was the mainstay and support for me. This evening I discussed with him the purchase of a new car, and what, and anyway. After the Council of Amir, I exchanged this year my sports car for a new one and had decided for a practical and solid Peugeot 205 in red color. Poopsie liked the new car a lot. For him it was the greatest to take a ride with Mum in the car throughout the area. Unfortunately, there was a problem. If I put him in his seat and strapped him, what I always did, it didn't take less than 5 minutes until he had climbed out of the seat and stood on the back seat or danced to the music playing, or he looked out the rear window and waved to the following drivers. If he was tired, he lay down, even on the rear shelf. It remained an unsolved mystery for me how he freed himself from the straps. It remained an unsolved mystery to me how he always freed himself from the strap belt. All talk and insults didn't help. He spent the ride standing up at the back. Even the threat he no longer ought to ride with me brought nothing, for he was small but not stupid and knew Mama had to work and Poopsie goes to Kirsten. One of these days I had to stop at a red light. Next to me, on the right lane, a policeman, on his motorcycle, also stopped. This was especially exciting for Poopsie, and he gesticulated wildly at the window. The policeman also waved his hand. I saw this from the corner of my eye, but kept looking straight ahead. Also didn't react on Poopsie's, "Mama, Mama, look there!" It didn't help me. When the cop blew his horn and instructed me to hold on to the side of the road when the traffic light was green again, I knew evil was ahead. And of course, the cop believed not a word when I explained that Poopsie repeatedly freed himself from the car seat. It had cost me a fine of 50 marks. This time I was really angry with Poopsie, and this he didn't like at all. From now on he remained in the seat, at least mostly. Another time I took him to my bank in Hamburg-Altona, where I had to pay bills. I let Poopsie only a minute out of my eyes, and he was gone. Startled, I left everything and ran out of the door, looked left and right, nothing. Poopsie was gone, vanished without a trace. So I ran back into the bank in panic and shouted, "Call the police, my son has disappeared." I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. All bank customers ran wildly out in all directions. A bank robbery couldn't have been more exciting. The bank employee who waited on me was trying to calm me down. The police was on the way, she informed me. Then, to coincide with the la-la of the police car, came in an African woman who had previously been also inside the bank, with Poopsie, who was beaming across the whole face, a lollipop in one hand and in the other a balloon. Laughing, she told me, "I have found your son down at Karstadt at a promotion stand." The focus was on the gifts, and squeezed my Poopsie back into my arms. The police were now attended to the scandal, gathered quickly the picture without much explanations, and one of them said to Poopsie in a stern voice, "My friend, you are still a bit too small to wander off by yourself." For a moment Poopsie twisted his face as if to cry, but decided then not to waste his time with the police, instead preferring to enjoy his loot. I was just relieved and happy to have my Poopsie back again. However, not everything ran as smoothly and with happy ending this year. It would still get quite rough. This year came legislative changes on taxes for owners of a property. From now on, also property owners who didn't live in their property would come to the enjoyment of the high deduction. This drove the prices of homes to immense heights. I had long since intended to enlarge our living situation. I could afford it financially and therefore joined to play the poker game of real estate. After I had done a value rating by a broker, received the information, I could easily sell the apartment for 85,000 marks. However, it would have to be evacuated. The agent had already a solution at hand in the form of another apartment in Hamburg-Bahrenfeld. It certainly needed a little refurbishing, but 2.5 rooms in Hamburg for a given purchase price of 165,000 would be a bargain. Unfortunately, He didn't point out the disadvantages of a condo in Hamburg, and I had to feel the pain later. First of all, the running around began all over again after I had seen the apartment and decided to buy it. The renovation work could be executed just as well if we were already living inside. I didn't want to lose any time and sell the other home as quickly as possible. The bathroom had to be rebuilt from the ground, and most importantly, there was only one radiator in the entire apartment, and this one was in the living room, in the form of an ancient electric night storage heating. The other rooms were ice cold. The so-called half-room was as large as one complete one. Thus, Poopsie and Kathy would each have a room for themselves, and this was my score. For me, it was as always enough to have a combined living bedroom, because I didn't even dream in any way to enlarge our family. Neither with children. Shortly after Poopsie's birth, I had myself sterilized. Nor with a man. The walls of this flat and the old wood floor could still be renovated later. Since I possessed some savings on my account, I would manage somehow. Some facts, unfortunately, I had overlooked in my haste, like the environment outside. When visiting the apartment, it was already dark outside and I couldn't see anything. At the moment, I only saw the huge benefits, like living in the same district as Kirsten and saving half of the petrol expenses for commuting to work. The bank gave me a new loan, but unfortunately, this already didn't meet my calculations. The loan amount was, including interest rates, etc., almost 3 times as high as the first, because my other apartment was not sold yet. The monthly amortization totaled according to a monthly high of 1,100, initially set at 10 years. After that, who knew? I was now the proud owner of 2 properties and accordingly had to make 2 proud redemptions. But initially, the new ownership in the Hamburg Land Registry had to be entered. As a farewell to our apartment in Norderstedt, I gave a big party with my friends. Guests from the sky. Charles brought John and Don Paulo. The small apartment was so loaded, it was more like a sardines party. Everybody stood or danced closely pressed together, like sardines in a can. And of course, Poopsie was in the middle. Even Charles had to laugh about the way Poopsie practiced the first dance steps, shaking his butt. What Kathy concerned, I noticed quickly the sparks flying between her and Don Paulo. I didn't have a problem with it. On the contrary, I preferred it this way than not knowing who she was roaming about with. After all, she was 14 years old, and until then didn't have a single boyfriend, at least not that I knew. Don Paulo was indeed a lot older than her, but I liked him very much. He was intelligent and spoke almost perfect German, French, Portuguese, and English. After all the guests were gone, and Charles helped me to bring order to the chaos, he asked, "Did you notice that something is going on between Don Paulo and Kathy?" "I'm not blind," I replied, something surprised that this himself loving macho still noticed what was going on around him. Charles was this evening different from the usual anyway. We still had music playing from a cassette, and Charles suddenly pulled me into his arms to dance with me. Then he took off my clothes first, then his, and made love to me in an unusual, gentle and loving way. Afterwards, he held me in his arms and asked suddenly, "If we get married, will you take my name, or would you want me to take yours?" I laughed out loud, and Charles laughed too, but turned serious again. "I mean what I said. It was no joke. I want us to get married." Now I was well surprised of it. "Charles, I will not marry you or anyone else. Leave everything as it is, right? It is okay how it is." The next day I went to see Amir in the dorm. Imagine, Charles made a marriage proposal last night. "And you said no, of course." "Logically, I'm not interested to get married." "What do you really fear?" "Sure, Charles is not necessarily the guy to marry, But do you always want to carry on like this? The lone warrior? Amir knew my history. Amir, if I should ever marry again, then out of love. I don't love Charles, but I like him. I also like Marco. Oh, I don't know. Rita, but you're not giving a chance to anybody. Don't really let anyone get close to you. You look like 22 and not like 32, but you will get older. Your children will be grown up someday. Do you want to be left alone then? I'm sorry, but that is not my thing, and not yours if you ever be honest with yourself. Do you know how many times you actually told me about Tony? Woman, close that chapter with this old story and stop comparing every man with his ideal picture of Tony. You're chasing a phantom. Let us philosophize. If Tony would have stayed with you, do you think he would not have cheated on you? Or perhaps he would have become a drunkard, or worse, he would have been beating you? Forget it. No one is perfect. But it is possible that Charles is serious and willing to change. Think about it. These were quite tough, clear words of Amir, and they made me think. But Charles I would not marry. Ralph drove the moving truck, and my friends from the gang helped with all, so we were very quickly brought the procession behind us. Beforehand, Don Paulo had asked me respectfully whether he had my permission to have Kathy as his girlfriend. This impressed me very much, and I agreed, but laid down a condition. If you make her pregnant, I'll castrate you with my own hands. So both of them were inseparable already before the move. Seen in daylight, our new residential area was pretty bleak and dismal. Next door was a cemetery, which led Ralph to joke, "But this is most convenient. When you submit the spoon, you don't need to walk all too far." I didn't feel like laughing. Nothing was like in the green Norderstedt. Bobo remarked, "The apartment is okay. If you invest some 20,000 marks, you can really make a nice place of it." "What?" I asked in alarm. "Rubbish," interfered Amir. "We'll get it done cheaper." But before anything could get done, first of all came the letter along with payment instructions for the transfer tax, and this was quite a hammer for me, because nobody had warned me that Hamburg was so much more expensive as places outside the city. Together with the tax for the ground, which was due annually, already went quite a big part of my savings. Shortly afterwards came the next shock: owners' meetings. At this meeting it was decided unanimously to have the roof covered newly. Each owner had to join with a small matter of 4,000 marks. My luck was I sold the Norderstedt apartment rather quickly for 85,000, of which the broker, however, withdrew 3,000 for the placement of the sale. My entire financial plan was tumbling, and I confessed my worries to Amir. "I'm afraid I have to work in the sky for the next 30 years if this continues."